Coming up on our next installment of America's Hope, children are back in school. Amid the problems they face with crime, drugs, human trafficking, and social media, how can they stay focused on getting a good education? We'll meet two teachers who are actively caring for kids, America's future, on our next America's Hope. Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope, and we always like to tell you at the start of the show that no matter where you are, we hope that you're taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. You know something else that matters? Education. Educating our children to make sure that our children from grade school to high school to college and graduate work have the best opportunities to have a great education. Why? Nelson Mandela said it best. Education is the gateway out of poverty. So, if we want to improve our nation, let's make sure that we're giving our children the best kind of education they should have. And we're going to talk about that tonight. Talk to some members of the education community and what they're doing for our children. Let's get started. And as we get started, it's important to note that for the past decade, Lisa Babbage has been involved with a variety of causes, all aimed at restoring women and children through education and needs-based support and workforce development, all important components of living your best life now. Now, this passion that emerged from her own need, recovering from childhood sexual abuse and homelessness. And since working through her personal trauma, Lisa went on to receive a doctorate in public policy and nonprofit leadership, and she is currently working on her second master's. Lisa joins us right now in the classroom where she's been working for the past 20 years, teaching children to be their better selves. Lisa, thanks for joining us this hour. It's important to have you on America's Hope.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
You know, you're joining us from the classroom in Atlanta, and kids are back in school now. They're going to school on a daily basis to learn as best as they can. What are the impediments that stand in their way?
Well, to be honest with you, we don't even have enough time to get into it. But one thing I do want to point out to your viewers is that we have a whole population of students that we would consider immigrants, first-generation students not born in this country, and they have some very specific needs that most of the public is not even aware of. It's costing taxpayer dollars. It's costing think tanks to propose various things that may have impacts on our native-born learners. And all in all, it is something that needs all hands on deck because these are children, they are in our borders, and they desperately need help.
So well said. They do need our help, and we should be able to help all children regardless of where they're from once they arrive to this country. You know, you're a charter member of Voices Against Trafficking. Let's be clear that some children coming into our country have been the victims of child trafficking and abuse. Can you talk to us about that element? Because that's another layer that you have to work through in order to get to the child's heart and mind and spirit to help them.
Absolutely. We have so many students that are suffering PTSD, whether it's because of sexual abuse or some other type of abuse. Even the very act of immigrating to another country can cause trauma. We have students that are acting out aggressively, withdrawing within themselves. Of course, suicide is a factor with our young people. To be honest with you, every classroom teacher today has to not just be parent, but counselor, teacher, and doctor.
So Lisa, when you're looking at the plethora of issues that you have to contend with, how do you instill in all children, regardless of where they're from, children who are already here in America, as well as those children who have just come here from a new country, how do you help them find hope and then cope with what they've undergone?
As you said, I've been a teacher for 20 years. And when I first began in this, my second career, I can't say that I was a person filled with hope myself. It has gotten easier over the years, not because I have learned more about being an educator. Of course, that's true. But honestly, I've learned more about my relationship with Jesus Christ, which has helped me find hope within myself, something that I can pass on to my students. Most of us will agree that without hope, the heart is broken, it is sick. Hope deferred makes the heart weak. Many of our children today are suffering from a broken heart. Their families are broken. Their spirits have been broken in many cases, and sometimes even physically broken. So, what do we do in the classroom or in our communities to instill that hope? I think for many of us, it starts with the hope that we have in our own hearts. And it becomes contagious when you see that individual as a person and not as a victim. You see that person as an individual who can overcome in time what has been their story so that a new story can be written. And I think if you don't have that perspective, it makes it much more difficult to instill hope in a young person or anyone that you may be mentoring.
Lisa, I have to be honest, I concur with you, but you're a teacher among millions of other teachers throughout this country who have the deck sometimes stacked against them and what they can teach and can't teach. You just talked
Right.
about your faith, and sometimes that comes
Mm.
under fire when you're expressing your faith, even outside of the classroom. So when you come up against that challenge, how do you address it?
First, I always say you have to decide what battles, what hill you're going to die on, what your battle is going to be. I wrote a book in 2018 called Not So Cookie Cutter Kids. I was in a classroom of children, 34 children from 20 some odd nationalities. A couple of those students had never held a pencil before, never had any formal students studies. Most of them were refugees. I was in over my head. I had Muslims in full religious attire in my classroom. And I had to make a decision about if I was going to put my faith on the shelf or leave it in the car before I went into that classroom. I wouldn't have survived that year without being my authentic self. And what I decided to do was look at these children as creations of God, regardless of what their background is. Instead of proselytizing, as so many find that line and they cross over it, I tried to say, what would Jesus do? I just looked at them as people and they saw my faith in my actions. So I never came under fire for my faith. In fact, I was affectionately called the Jesus freak because they understood I cared about them as people. And so they were not offended by the faith that I carried with me as well.
Yeah, it sounds like what you really carried with you and showed was love and respect and care for the students you were teaching, regardless of their religious or ethnic background. And isn't that what America
Right.
is?
That is the great experiment, is it not? And
Yeah.
it's a reflection of heaven in so many ways. And I think where people are hesitant, because I truly understand that, is letting God lead them daily. In everything that we do, it's important for us to take a little self reflection. So, as an educator, that is something that I've tried to instill in other teachers that I mentor is that reflective practitioner. So, regardless of whatever industry we happen to be in, we need to start with the person that we see in the mirror and make sure that person is doing what they need to do in order to serve others. It is that servant's heart that, yes, it is mirrored in Jesus Christ, but it is a best practice for any business outside of faith. It is a best practice for any community, any group where two or more are gathered. They must have a servant amongst them to be their leader.
I like how you put that, a servant's heart, and that's really what all of us should consider ourselves, to follow that golden rule to treat others as we would have them treat us. Lisa, you've written several books, and you care about children. I'm curious, what grade do you teach right now? Because your books are meeting the needs of children through every age category.
I teach middle school, which in the South is grades 6 through 8, but I've been a college professor. I'm an adjunct professor with Southeastern University, which is a small Christian college. I have taught K 8 through over my years. But, before becoming a teacher, I was a trainer. So I just say I'm a teacher, whatever grade that is. But, many of my books are geared toward adults. I find that, there is a huge gap between the emphasis that we're placing on helping children and the emphasis of the broken adults that were not caught when they were young people. And so now they're out there, and many know that old adage that hurt people hurt people. And so I have a whole section of books that are geared toward adult education as well. You mentioned in my introduction that we do a lot of workforce development for single moms. I mean, that is a big
Yeah.
opportunity for those of us who care about our neighbor to actually get involved with these broken families that need someone to come alongside and gird them up.
And Lisa, we want to talk about that. Let's take a break right now. On the other side of the break, I'd like to talk to you about that workforce development and also adulting, helping adults
Yeah.
learn how to be better humans. That's next. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to Lisa Babich, and what a really wonderful conversation with you, Lisa, about all the great work that you're doing in the field of education. Before we went to the break, you talked about workforce development, which is another important aspect of American life and building and fostering America's hope in single parents. Talk to me about what you've been able to do in this particular important field for single parents, most of them being women.
Yes, so I started in this area back in 2012. And the backstory is that as a child, I was homeless. Numerous times, my mother, brother, and I lived in a Salvation Army homeless shelter, both in Arizona and in Georgia. So I understood firsthand what it means to be without a home, to not know where your next meal is coming from. And this idea of homework, this idea of adulting, this idea of all the expectations society puts on people just could not be met because of the trauma situation that I found myself in. So I took that approach as I formed Maranatha House Ministries, and it was that nonprofit that was the springboard to get me into Voices Against Trafficking. Of course, any family that is homeless is at risk for trafficking. Many of us wrongly believe that trafficking only occurs at the border, or that trafficking only occurs in urban city centers such as New York City. But trafficking can occur anywhere, and people who do not have a stable home life are at risk for that, especially moms with young children. We find many kids in Georgia, the average age of a homeless child is 8 years old in Georgia. Now I don't know what it is anywhere else, but that is staggering. So what we've done is physically provide for the needs of these families by putting them up in extended stay hotels, providing resources as far as referrals to shelters, low income housing, even house shares. We provide food. I have worked with the Atlanta Union Mission for 14 years now in providing a subsidy to the outreach they have in their women's division through Sarah's Place. We have so many ways that we meet those physical needs, and that is a prelude to those additional needs that they may have as far as workforce development. What do? We tutor adults who are illiterate, either fiscally or traditionally. We also help provide resume buildings, put people in touch with the vocational schools in our area. Thankfully, I live in a county that does have some resources, and so we partner with our other nonprofits to make sure that needs are met, even though it's oftentimes piecemeal together. But just having someone lend an ear is many times what these mothers need to give them the courage to go out and find a way to make ends meet again and again and again. But, from the practical to the training and providing them with education and opportunities to interview for employment, the gamut. I've partnered with a couple of organizations here specifically that focus on workforce development in Georgia, and it has been beneficial to see how this small pot of 12 or 24 grows over time. And these families, these women, give back to other moms who are struggling to make sure that they are providing for their family under their own strength eventually.
Yeah, one helps the other, and then it keeps on growing, getting
Yes.
better. Lisa, I got to ask you. You went through trauma yourself as a young child. We know the outcome is, and that is that you became successful. But how did you get through that trauma? Because sometimes people who have been sexually abused as children, they go on to find a life that's not as productive as it has turned out for you. How did that change for you?
I haven't quite been able to put it in words because I get emotional just hearing you talk about it.
Yeah.
Up until I turned 40 years old, I was not living a productive life. In my early 20s, I made a decision that my life's ambition was to be a cashier at a local grocery store. A grocery store, mind you, that's no longer in business. I met that goal at the age of 17. And from there, I had no other way to go. I had no other path because I only expected to be a cashier in a grocery store. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that without a path, without a future, we flounder and we are just tossed in the wind. And that is truly how I lived my life until about the age of 39 when I received a devastating medical diagnosis. In the course of that physical healing, I received a spiritual healing as well. And it was a long process that is still in the making. But I began to look at myself through the lens of my Heavenly Father. I began to redefine the identity, the moniker that I have lived under my entire life, which is victim, which is impoverished, which is, a person who has low self esteem and no aspirations. That truly was who I was. I never considered who I could be. And once began to redefine my own identity, doors began to open that I had the courage eventually to walk through. Of course, one of the most practical things I did from the very beginning was I joined a small group of women who encouraged me. We studied the Bible, we spent time together, we did life together. Those women became my undergirders until I had the strength to look at myself differently in the mirror. And honestly, I believe that's where it all begins. Success begins in the mirror, and it happens every single day.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you've been able to share your story and the fact that you can look in the mirror and love the woman that you see and love the woman that you've become and that you will continue to be. I find your outlook towards life precious, and it's one that many of us should embrace. No one is perfect on this planet. We all are imperfect creatures, and we are prone to setbacks. But every time that I meet people like you, I see wonderful men and women able to take their setbacks and find out that it's a setup for a comeback. And that's because of your
And
faith.
I love that.
It's because of your faith, and that you realize
Yeah.
that God's plans for you are not for disaster, but for a future and a hope. And because you're living in this moment of being a person of hope and faith and love, you're able to pass that on to our children as well as to other adults. So based on that, what's your message to quote unquote the politicians, the faith leaders, and all the people who are looking at the children and saying they need this, they need that, and trying to legislate it? What can you encourage them to do to be better parents, better leaders, better servants?
I always say it's never too late to have a better tomorrow. And while there is a need for legislation, I think we have to have secure borders. That's a great way that legislation could work towards helping every American. But beyond that, we have got to look heart to heart to these individuals who need support. And we have to look within the community that already serves those individuals for the answers, the practical solutions. It's the ivory tower does not bode well for helping people who are in the pits of despair because there is no relationship there. Even if you could relate, there is no relationship. One thing I do in everything that I do, I stay connected to the government housing project that I was raised in. I frequently, on a monthly basis, go back to that community to stay grounded with the needs of people who I want to serve. And that is the only way to keep that relationship alive. Let me tell you, no one would have guessed that as a high school freshman or a high school senior, I'm sorry, with a GPA of 1.29, no one would have guessed that an individual like myself who went into homelessness during adolescence and after high school would have a PhD. But here I stand. It takes perseverance, it takes time. Many times, legislators want a quick fix, government officials want a quick fix, and the problem of forming a human being, a whole person, takes many, many years, many, many hands, not necessarily many, many dollars. And that's the difference between how faith leaders, those in government, community leaders should respond to the problems in their community. Throwing money at something doesn't solve anything.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
What solves it is exactly what you just stated about your own personal life, and then having the courage, the temerity, and the care to reach back and help others. I just appreciate you so much, Lisa Babich, for coming on this program. I understand that through your bio, you have a relative, your 4 times removed great granddaughter of the founder of the computer, Charles Babbage. You want to share something about that with us?
Well, again, life is crazy, and who would have expected that these things would happen? But my grandfather was an Anglican priest. His grandfather was Charles Babbage, inventor of the computer, a British polymath in Victorian England who invented the computer before homes had electricity. So it was powered by steam. And thankfully, there are models of his engine all over the world, including a display in London that exhibits half of his brain. But my grandfather, his grandchild, came to America to work with Dr. Martin Luther King. And that's just as an amazing story, because in his native Australia, there was a problem of racism with the Aborigines, and the government was not budging. So he came to America to work with Dr. Martin Luther King to try to do something in the Black community. And that's how my parents met. No one could have put that story together. I'm in the midst of writing a screenplay about my grandfather, Charles Babbage, right now. And it's being shopped by various studios, and I'm very excited about bringing his story to light, because he was a man of faith. And it was definitely a faith in God that allowed him to persevere in his life's mission of creating the first computer.
Lisa, you are a woman of wonder. One could arguably say that you were destined to where you are today. A final question with you. What's your hope for America?
Repentance. I am involved in politics here in Georgia. Obviously, I'm involved in many causes regarding, the broken and the brokenhearted. I believe our country has a pivotal role to play. It already has, of course, but I don't believe that duty, that mantle is finished. I don't believe God's finished with us yet. And so I pray for repentance from the White House to Main Street. I pray that every individual who calls himself a son or daughter of Jesus Christ looks in that mirror, gets back in line with what the Holy Spirit is telling them, and that we move forward as a country in unison so that we can continue to preach the gospel to all the world and be a light on a hill. Not much.
Not much at all. And it's hard for anyone to argue with that, regardless of where they're from or what country or what faith. That's quite well said, Lisa. Lisa, don't be a stranger to the show. Come back anytime. Lisa Babich.
Thank you so much.
And welcome back to America's Hope. So I'd like to talk about education right now, because many kids are back in school, they're back in college, they're back in the classroom. And so what do we do to help influence our children to be the best that they can be, to work on making sure that they're good, better, best, never let it rest, that they take their good and make it better, and their better and make it best? Well, our next guest is Stephen Boyd. He's a rising influential leader in education and other fields, who for nearly 30 years, he has dedicated his life to improving and impacting the lives of others in the sectors of education, faith, and business. He's a gifted author, a motivational speaker, and a trainer, and a coach, and a consultant, and a music content creator, which of course resonates well with the youth of America. Stephen joins us right now to talk about how he's seeking to help people increase their leadership value by educating their minds, exciting their hearts, and empowering their hands. That means lifting up their gifts. Stephen, good of you to join us this hour from good old Salisbury, Maryland, which is right there on the eastern shore of Maryland. Of course, that's a great university down there. You've been working with children and helping to educate them. Talk to me about why it's so valuable to inspire them with all the gifts that you have, from coaching to music, using all of those gifts to help a child develop their minds and their art and their strengths.
Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be on the show today. One of the things with children is children learn more about what is caught than what is taught. And our behaviors as adults have a heavy influence on the choices that they will make as adults. So, one of the things with respect to inspiring and educating, empowering youth is to help them understand number one, as they navigate through the winds of change that they go through from birth to adolescence, they need to make sound decisions and they need to make decisions that will hopefully help them become mature adults. So, my passion as relates to motivating students, motivating teachers, is to give people the tools they need to be responsible adults, to help the adults to understand that your presence really can make a difference or be deficient in the life of a youth. So, one of the things, particularly when we talk about the classroom management and student engagement trainings that we do, we really try to empower teachers to understand those dynamics as relates to controlling the classroom, motivating students, and then helping students to want to learn in profound ways. So we're really excited about the opportunity to not only empower and educate and excite students, but do the same for adults and for staff.
Yeah, that's well stated, and I love what you're doing to help children and the teachers. You mentioned teachers, so let me ask you a question about that, because a lot of times people will overlook the teacher and just focus on the pupil, the student. When it comes to teachers, helping them teach with greater sensitivity, particularly with all the things teachers have to go through in the classroom today,
Hmm.
how do you help them stay motivated and inspire themselves so they can do the same thing for their students?
Well, you have to be very encouraging with teachers. Many times you have to be empathetic to what they're going through professionally and sometimes personally. But then you have to move them from the myopic view of things that might be going wrong in the classroom to moving on the other side and help them be empathetic to what the students are going through and what they need to do to be that student's hero. And so you have to give teachers tools to what I like to call command the stage. Commanding the stage really has to do with, putting on, I would like to say, kind of being an actor and then drawing those students out of their context to embrace the content that they teach. And one of the things that we also try to help teachers understand is you have to be intimately acquainted with the context of your audience. One of our curriculums that we teach from called Contagious Teaching, when we train and when we consult with teachers, is we help them unpack who is in the room. The students that are in front of you, who's there? What do you know about them? And then much like a marketing agency would study niche markets and look at different trends, you as a teacher have to think along the same lines. For what purpose? The purpose is to get them to buy into the content that you teach. Oftentimes we are taught content very well in undergrad, and some of us that go and pursue master's degrees, more specialized degrees, we know content, but delivering that content to a specific context is a completely different animal. And some people just don't have the skill set. So what we try to do to motivate the teachers to want to hang in there is the more you know about your customer, the better you can sell to that customer. And in this case, the customer are the students. And
Yeah.
so what that does, it really helps teachers to breathe to say, okay, you know what? I have to know my customer. I got to know my kids. I got to build a relationship. I got to spend time. They don't necessarily need to. They may not be bought into the fact that I know the ins and outs of the War of 1812. But if I can understand the wars that they are going through and then find a correlation, now we have a connection by which now, because of their context, I can now get them to buy into the content.
Yeah, I love the way you unpack that. That means the teacher is proactively engaged in that child's life, looking beyond
Yes.
the surface and really understanding, as you said,
Hmm.
even from a transactional standpoint, that who am I talking to? Is this student my customer? But of course, the teachers take it further than that. I can still remember my second grade teacher. She was my favorite, Mrs. Phyllis Battle. I cried when she got married. She she was just a great teacher, and I remember her instructing me the way that my mother instructed me and inspired me. And to that point, as I recall that personal story, I guess I have to ask you. We've talked about teachers, we've talked about students. Let's talk about the parents. Parents, of course, are
Hmm.
bombarded with so many things. They have to provide food, clothing, housing, and then, of course, inspire their children and instruct their children. And yet, there's so many things out there that can be distracting to the parents. What's your message to the parents of America?
Well, we know parents are juggling a lot. Unfortunately, in America, we're probably about 40 to 50% of our households that are single parent households. And in many cases, we have parents that are working two and three jobs. So there's a lot of empathy for parents that have to balance being a provider, being a protector, and also in this case, being the educator. So I hearkened to a story years ago when I was an administrator at a high school, and I was so inspired by a substitute that I had hired that I think her husband had passed several years ago, and they had migrated to the area. And she shared a story about her children. Her children were well adjusted and doing well. And, we were just talking one day, and I asked, with all that you kind of had to deal with, what did you do? What was your secret to success? And I remember this story vividly, and it inspired me. She said, every Friday I gave each of my children a date with me one on one. So I had four children. On the first Friday, this was your night to have one on one time with mommy. I gave them that time. We did whatever they wanted to do. And then the second Friday was the next child. The third Friday was the fourth child, so on and so forth. And one of the things she shared, and I never forgot that, is the anticipation that the students had because they would actually plan to say, hey, mom, when it's my Friday, I want us to do this. And so they would invariably get their plan together. And if there was something about money or if they were going out to the movies, they would have to do more chores around the house to, get the allowance to pay for the movie ticket. So my message to parents is we know you have to deal with a lot. We know you're struggling. We know that you're balancing many things. But if you can carve out some specialized time on a consistent basis to invest in your sons and daughters, that would really help with the educational piece. Because as one who's been an educator for now almost 30 years, I see the struggles that the teachers go through. And of course, what's happening governmentally and societally is more is put on the schools to parent the children. And in the real world, it's just really impossible for schools to do it all. If we can get back to a community based approach with respect to schools and working with our parents and working with the community, and we have our role, you all have your role, and then we raise our children together. The old African proverb that says it takes a village to raise one child. I truly believe that. And so
Yeah,
my
it
message
certainly
to
does.
parents is yes, we are part of your village, but in whatever way that you can kind of, adjust and adapt as often as possible so that your children know that you're just as much vested in them as we are vested in them as well.
Man, I like the way you say that. That's so good. That is so good. Look, we're going to take a slight break, and when we come back on the other end of the break, you're going to hear how Stephen is actively engaged in trying to heal the nation of our woes. He has a program called Heal the Land. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Don't go. And welcome back to America's Hopes. I'm talking to Stephen Boyd. He's a rising influential leader, and we've just been talking about education and what our children are going through when it comes to learning in the classroom, and what teachers are going through to apply those skills and those teaching abilities so that children can learn and prosper, and then of course what parents endure. Stephen, really what you're unpacking though is a problem for the United States in terms of education. We have fallen in some ways in terms of our prowess in being the educational leader throughout the world. But our hope is that by talking to speakers and trainers and coaches and consultants like you, we can break through that and actually change what's happening in the classroom. But it really is what's going on in the home. Now, you have a special project that you're utilizing to help heal the home called Heal the Land. Talk to me about that and what it means for the people that you're in front of with Heal the Land.
In 2019, the Lord inspired a song while sitting at a stoplight, actually, called Heal the Land. And we developed it going into 2020. At the time, we were going to do a complete EP. But the Lord just kind of inspired me to not release about 6 to 7 songs we were working on, to just release the one song, Heal the Land. And now when I reflect on that time, I understand why. For those who have an opportunity to hear the song, it's in all digital platforms. But basically, we kind of crafted the song around 2 Chronicles 7:14. And it says, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, seek my face, and turn from the wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal the land. And when I was inspired to write the song, it was as a result of lots of egregious things that were going on in our world at that time. And subsequently, we're still seeing the aftermath of man's decisions to walk out of alignment with the holy God. But the good news is the song Heal the Land, and then also the book Heal the Land, A Blueprint for Spiritual Restoration, really talks about what is the blueprint to bring revival, to bring restoration, to bring reconciliation in our world. And it's a 4-point blueprint. Humble ourselves, pray, seek the face of God, and turn from our wicked ways. And so the music was first released in 2020. And as best as we could, we tried to market and promote in the middle of a pandemic. And then subsequently, I was inspired to go back and finish what I started in 2019 and release the Heal the Land book. And you can find it in Amazon and find the book. Is a very, very simple way of communicating to people that God has given us a very simple blueprint, a very simple remedy to reverse or to right many of the wrongs in this world. And it starts with each and every one of us individually, humbling ourselves, praying and seeking the face of God, turning from our wicked ways. Then we can hear from heaven. There's a clear channel that we have between God and us. Now, as a carry on or a follow through to that, we have the Heal the Land experience, which is a musical experience that we partner with government officials, local churches, and other entities to provide a concert atmosphere where people who have gone through very traumatic events can come into a healing musical environment and become whole and get prayer and get other resources as we partner with different entities in different parts of the country. And so the Heal the Land experience is really a spiritual extension that combines the resources of government and the resources of music, the spiritual and the natural coming together, that we can communicate to the world that God wants to heal the land, and giving people an environment and a platform to receive that healing for themselves.
There's a lot of hope that can be found in that kind of process, especially when you're having the interagencies coming together, government and private enterprise, and even the faith community. I have to point out that you're from Maryland, and
Yeah.
as a man who, as a boy, grew up in Maryland. That's my home state, and you're from part of Maryland, the Eastern Shore, which is most notably known
Hmm.
for Harriet Tubman of the Underground Railroad, and what she did, and
Hmm.
her heroism and her courage, and her ability to see that the importance of education was vital. But also, Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist who went on to advise presidents as well as members of Congress during and before and after the Civil War. Frederick Douglass said something very key. He said, "It is better to build strong children than to repair broken men." The program that I
Mm.
hear you talking about, Heal the Land, and the educational consultants, the consultancy that you do, sounds to me like you're trying to make sure that we have strong children so that we're
Hmm.
not left with repairing broken adults. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, sir. Initially in 1997, when I first started teaching, I had my plan. And my plan was to perhaps do what I'm doing now. But when I reflect back on now 27 years in public education and see the amount of children that have impacted when I was in the classroom for 15 years before I became an administrator, the conversations that you have with children, the times you invest in them, the times you go to the store, to get them some food or to buy school supplies, make those investments in them, and I see them now. Um, it reminds me again of what you just said about Frederick Douglass. Many of them are well adjusted. Many of them are doing well. Many of them have families. And while my plan may not have been to do that, I'm thankful that I can look back and see that God had a bigger plan for me to make those investments so that now, as I'm speaking on these national platforms, I have the experience and the credibility and to reflect on those that I've helped in years past and know that we can provide that help to others. And so, if I were to give a message of hope to those that are watching us right now, children, adults, um, invest time in your children. Invest time into loving them, teaching them, listening to them. Because although you may feel like they're not listening, they are. You may feel like they're not connecting with you, but they are. You may feel like it's going in one ear and out the other, but trust me, they are. The Bible says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to have planted those seeds and see many of them germinate in the lives of others. And so, with the platform of Heal the Land, it is a broader message for us to encourage others to plant seeds so we don't recycle hate, we don't recycle racism, we don't recycle all kinds of ills from generation to generation. This is an opportunity for us to heal ourselves so we can also heal our children who are the next generation.
Stephen Boyd, appreciate you dropping by and dropping a
Thank
good
you so
dose of
much.
hope on America's hope. Appreciate you so much. And welcome back. My final word tonight is that it's very important, as we can see from our guests, to value our children, to treat them with the utmost respect and also with the tender, loving care to help them grow into becoming productive citizens and just great human beings. And never to extinguish the hope that is burning within their hearts to aspire to greatness. That's my message tonight, America. Hopefully you've learned from our guests that we should value our children and let hope prevail. Good night. Your America and my America.
United we stand, divided